travel isn't just about destinations, it's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabocha, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
And now, The Money Show
with Stephen Grootes on 702.
Let's walk the talk.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by ABSA CIB, powering Africa's potential from ground to grid. Proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025. Good evening. Welcome to the Friday edition of The Money Show. There's a very interesting comment today from an international hotel chain, InterContinental Hotels Group. They suggest that actually we don't have enough luxury hotels in South Africa. And I mean, I think for most of us at the moment where you're sort of scraping by, you think to yourself, who's going to go to a luxury hotel? But actually, there is a big market for this kind of thing. And there's sort of obvious places where you would put them, right? I mean, Cape Town, yes. Quite well served, though. I do wonder about Durban. The water is warmer. You can sort of probably extend the season quite a bit longer. I mean, I've swum in Durban's beaches in the middle of July. You might well have too. But then also you've got to look at the services. eThekwini's had a very rough time. I think we can probably agree on that. So would a luxury hotel really work there? And then I was thinking Joburg. And wonderful views sometimes, but I don't know if there's a market there. But I do know some small towns in South Africa, and I'm sure you do too. Maybe you've been through, maybe you've passed through, maybe you know someone who knows someone who, you know. And I wondered if maybe for a smaller luxury hotel, there is something unique about some of our small towns, and maybe there would be a little opportunity for someone to do a sort of niche boutique, something a bit posh in one of those places. You might have a small town that you think actually that would work quite well in. We can probably agree that Clarence, I've never been there, is possibly overtraded. Dilstra might be another example. Paternoster in the Western Cape. I mean, Hermanus is overtraded. Plet is no longer a town. It's a thriving megalopolis. I don't know, Port Nolloth. Never been to Port Nolloth. The water's quite cold. But maybe there's a place that you could recommend that we should start to look at putting up a little niche hotel in small town South Africa. 011 883 0702 021 446 0567 and voice notes this evening on 072 702 1702.
The Money Show
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
and DSTV channel 856.
Well, confirmation this week that since the start of the two-pot pension system, South Africans with pensions have taken 57 billion rand out of them. 15 billion rand has gone to SARS as a result. I mean, that's around 26% of the money taken out has been taken as tax. Natasha Haget-Henchie is a consulting actuary and a member of the Actuarial Society of South Africa's Retirement Matters Committee. Natasha, good evening. I do appreciate the time. We weren't really sure what was going to happen when we started the system. I remember, ask an actuary and you got a different estimate of how much money was going to come out. What's the data telling us so far? It's a fair bit of money. Natasha, good evening. Are you with us?
Good evening. Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Sorry,
I was asking what the data tells us so far. It's quite a lot of money that's come out of the pots.
Quite a lot of money has left the pot, but actually not as much as, so I think people have taken what they could. In the first round, I think we kind of think of it in two tranches, the first tax year up until Feb and then the second tax year from March. So industry-wide, 40-50% of members took their full amount in the first tranche. We're probably seeing about 40%, of claims, 40% claims again in the second tranche, and 75% of those in the second tranche also took in the first tranche. So it's a lot of members, and they are taking the money that they obviously need.
So, I mean, what this tells us is that a lot of people are taking all they can take as soon as they can get it.
Absolutely. I think that's the key. We kind of thought we did think about it, but we have been surprised by the numbers and the volumes that are coming through.
So, I mean, and presumably if people have already taken it out twice, they're going to keep taking it out. And that's going to be the pattern. And that's really the concern that we have about the longer term.
Yeah, absolutely, yes. So we're definitely going to see, repeat every March. I think there's going to be a flurry of activity. Look, if we can get our economy kick-started, then, maybe we won't have people getting that need. But I do think that people are taking what they can when they can.
So as I understand it, this is the first time this kind of reform has been tried anywhere in the world to have a two-pot system. There's been a lot of research on similar things, but they're all slightly different to ours. Is it too early to say if this was a bad idea? And we probably need 20 years of data before we can say that.
So, funny enough, we actually think that it's not a bad idea from the point of view that members are, the trade-off of having to kind of deserve 2/3 in exchange for 1/3 means that we're actually going to be ending up with people having a really good benefit of 2/3 of their benefits at retirement, as opposed to the previous scenario where they were cashing in their full pension every year, resigning jobs, and then not actually having enough to retire on. So we think that actually in the long run they will be better off. They will have less cash at retirement. So this is, I think, the key thing that people don't understand is that they'll have 2/3, but it'll be in their compulsory annuitization section, and they will have less cash. But I do think they will have, probably on balance, we think people will be better off.
So in other words, I mean, yes, we mustn't get too worried about the actual numbers. We must sort of think of the long term, and it's still better.
Yes, that is the modelling that we did. And if I can give it to you in simple math, think of it, a 50-year-old is the kind of guy who thinks about his pension and then doesn't, stop saving. So he's going to save from 50 to 65. 100 times 60 times 50 years, or 2/3 times 45 years. That's 3 times more. And that's kind of the number that we're looking at.
Sure.
Yeah.
All right, Natasha, thank you. Natasha Huggett-Henschie is a consulting actuary and a member of the Actuarial Society of South Africa's Retirement Matters Committee.
7:02.
7:02.
Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
The InterContinental Hotels Group saying this week it believes South Africa is underserved when it comes to luxury hotels. Business Live reporting the group says there are several places, several cities in the country that could use more luxury hotels. Tshifhiwa Tshivhengwa is the CEO of the Tourism Business Council of South Africa. Tshifhiwa, good evening. Good to talk to you again. I mean, I think for most of us, a difficult financial environment, we almost find it hard to believe there is a market for more luxury hotels. But I imagine this is a group that knows what they're talking about, and there's the international market to consider.
Absolutely, Stephen, and good evening to you and to your listeners. I think what's very good about this is that when we get the international brands looking at South Africa's tourism potential the way they are looking, it's a stamp of approval, and it shows that there is future demand in terms of those that want to come to our destination and experience what we have to offer from tourism perspective. So they have done their studies. They are probably looking at all corners, and they can see that there is a space for luxury products that will serve not only the domestic market but the international markets. And they can see from their clientele that there is probably demand for African products, and South Africa as the prime destination within the African continent has to play a bigger role in that. And I do believe in what they're saying because we have projected that we need to grow our tourism numbers from international inbound perspective to more than 15 million. By 2030, and therefore there will be a market. And I think we are a future destination.
So where would we put some more luxury hotels? And Tshifhiwa, please don't be boring and say Cape Town. I mean, Durban surely has warmer seawater?
Absolutely. Look, if you look at Durban, we have some work that we are doing to clean up the city and to make sure that it's appealing to tourists, make sure that it's safe and everything else. And of course, because it has the stretch, of beaches, it simply means that there is a huge potential there And if you take any tourist from any other country and you say, here we are in Durban, they want to, for them it feels like they're in Miami or they're in Thailand and many other destinations where you've got this warm water and you're able to swim at any time. So, that's a city that has a huge potential, and we need to do a whole lot more work. And we are doing something there with what we call Durban Direct, where we're going to attract some airlines to fly directly to Durban from many different destinations around the world. And also, if you look at Eastern Cape, that market and that province, the stretch of ocean that we have, there's still a whole lot more things to do. And of course, if you look at Johannesburg or Gauteng as a pulse of the country, there is still a whole lot more that needs to be done here. And I think from culture, food, and many other things, there's a whole lot more things that we can do. So we need to pay attention to all these places. Secondary cities are a little bit different. And you require smaller properties, like if you go to the likes of Hoedspruit, you go to the likes of Polokwane, you can't build massive. But perhaps from conferencing point of view, that's where they can come in to build conference centers to make sure that, we can hold bigger meetings in those particular areas. So very important, this report. It gives us a stamp of approval as a destination. It shows that we are a sought-after destination, and it shows that we are a destination of the future. And when these guys are looking at this from the international perspective, because they've cast their eyes from investment point of view to many different destinations, and they're looking for growth. And that means that the growth is going to come from South Africa and the African continent.
So, I find Joburg fascinating because I don't know what people would come to Joburg for, except that it is a really good launch pad to the wildlife and to see the people, if I can call it that. But I think that many people who live in Joburg just have a sense that there's nothing to see in Joburg just because of the state of the place at the moment.
Yeah, there's a whole lot, and you're quite right. There's a whole lot to see in Joburg or in the Gauteng region, because you do have culture, you do have the heartbeat of the country. You have that pulse. If you talk about entertainment, you talk about nightlife, and the rest. So it is a very important place that we need to capitalize on. Of course, we have challenges. You talk about all the metros and the challenges that we were experiencing. But from tourism point of view, if you compare Joburg to, places like Nairobi and many other cities around the world, you got to clean it up. You got to, reintroduce the culture of, gastronomy tourism, cultural tourism, township tourism, and the rest. And this is where it's a melting pot for all cultures of South Africa. So it's a very important place because that's where you can have a taste of everything. And of course, if you want to do safari, you can go Pretoria North and still, have safari. So it's a very important place, and also for business tourism. Lots of business travelers come to Gauteng to do business. They require 5-star accommodation. They require the difference. So we've got to rebuild, and we've got to rebuild the entertainment culture. This whole thing of not having entertainment 24/7, 7 days a week, where people can arrive at any time and be able to say, I'm going to this restaurant, it closes at 12 o'clock and so forth. We've got to fix that. So Gauteng is very important. It's the heartbeat of the country and is the heartbeat of the tourism industry.
One of the interesting dynamics over the last few years in South Africa has been a middle class, upper middle class people who live in big cities going to smaller towns for getaways, sometimes to stay for a little while. And I would think if you're a British business executive trying to get away from it all, some of our small towns have unique features and you really can get away from it all. Could one or two people build very small but very posh establishments in places like that?
No, absolutely they can. And we're seeing this trend, Stephen. If you go to Limpopo in the Vembe region, in the former Venda area, you would see that they build a dam there from Department of Water and Sanitation. And around that dam, there's a whole lot of luxury properties that are now in the market. Weddings are taking place. There are boats in the water. There's a whole tourism economy that's happening there. So you're quite right. And there are a lot of international travelers that are passing through. They're saying, wait a minute, let me go here and let me relax. Because this is something new, different. You are in the middle of the villages. You are able to experience the authenticity of South African culture and cuisines. So I agree with you. A lot more of European travelers, and when we did a roadshow in Europe, they're looking for something different, especially the repeat travelers. Something different to what they've done. They may have done Cape Town, they may have done Kruger, and every safaris and everything else that has to do with it. But they're looking for that unique experience. And that's how we need to capitalize all these secondary cities and the small towns that are unique. How do we make sure that we've got restaurants there? How do we make sure that you are able to stay there and soak in the culture, soak, in the vibrancy of the town, and make sure that, you come out from there, you say, wait a minute, there's some place in South Africa, in the middle of Free State, that has this heft that I need to go back to South Africa for.
Tshifhiwa Tshivhengwa, thanks so much. Really appreciate it. CEO of the Tourism Business Council of South Africa.
702. Stephen is on X.
At Stephen Grootes.
Well, most markets reacting fairly positively today to the statement from the White House that the US President Donald Trump will wait 2 weeks before making a decision about joining Israel's attack on Iran. Iran, meanwhile, saying it won't negotiate with the US or Israel while it's being attacked by Israel. John Stopford is the head of multi-asset income at NinetyOne Asset Management. John, good evening. I really appreciate the time. It seemed the first emotion for markets was a little bit of relief, and the oil price seemed to come down a little bit.
Yes, I think that's right. So clearly things have been escalating, and was definitely a sense, we know that Trump had approved attack plans on Iran, but not given the go-ahead. So to then have the press secretary at the White House announce a sort of 2-week opportunity to actually continue negotiations and de-escalate the situation, I think inevitably has been taken positively by markets.
I wonder if we'll be in this kind of pattern for a little while. So we don't know what will happen, but Israel clearly will keep up its attacks on Iran. Iran presumably will try to hit Israel if and where it can. And we don't know for the next 2 weeks what the US does. Does the oil price find a new equilibrium somewhere? Does it stay where it is right now? Does it maybe just the sheer uncertainty drive things higher a little bit?
I think markets try and price a range of outcomes. And so the oil price is at the highest levels for about a year, and it's gone up notably. But I don't think it's actually gone up that much. If you look at past crises or war events, oil prices would perhaps have risen more significantly. So the market, I think, is essentially putting quite a high probability that this ends up being sort of a short and sharp shock and doesn't lead to a material disruption in oil supply. And generally, if you look at what's called the forward curve, so how the market is pricing oil into next year and beyond, the expectation is actually the market will be oversupplied. So there's a tail risk in the price of more persistent or more significant disruption. So Iran's own oil not being available, and also potentially disruption to shipping in the Straits of Hormuz, where about a quarter of all seaborne oil passes through. But clearly you can see the way the market's reacting at the moment. It's tending to think this isn't going to be that big a deal. It'll be disruptive in the short term, and generally is probably quite optimistic that the outcome will be, certainly for the oil price and for markets in general, relatively limited.
You referred to the point yesterday where Trump was clearly drawing up attack plans. Then this pause comes, and that implies that there is a lot of thought and sort of rationality going into any future decision by the Trump administration. Just that, it would seem to me, might settle markets a little bit. It's not just gung-ho, yes, we're going in with Israel. Something else is happening.
Well, I think there are some political calculations going on. So clearly Trump is, his style is disruptive. It's always to unbalance, his opponent. And so them knowing that, the plans are ready and the ordnance is in place for an attack is, it concentrates the mind of the Iranians. But also I think there is a US political angle, which is if you look at the Republican Party and the MAGA base, they're pretty split on this. So you've got some hardline traditional Republicans who essentially want the Iran threat to be neutralized. But there's also all the people who voted for Trump because he said no more forever wars. And they all remember Iraq and so on. So I think there's a significant reluctance to move ahead here, and that I think might be part of the reason why the US hasn't acted in the way that maybe they might have done in the past.
John Stopford, thanks so much, really appreciate it. Head of multi-asset income at 91 Asset Management.
The Money Show.
The Markets.
Patrick Matidi is head of multi-asset strategies at Alawani Capital Partners. Patrick, good evening to you. Let's just pick up on that. Obviously a 2-week pause. Market's quite pleased with that. Maybe there'll be peace in the meantime, who knows? But obviously this is one of the big driving factors of the moment.
Yeah, good evening, Stephen, and thanks for having me. Indeed, there has been sort of a renewed focus on the oil price, just given what's happening geopolitically. And I think the markets does tend to remember what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine, where we did see the oil price doubling in a very short space of time. So there are those fears of inflation coming back, and hopefully this time around, this subsides, and then we will get a step execution.
Obviously we don't really know what's going to happen, but once again we have this area of uncertainty. The President, Cyril Ramaphosa, was saying today that we're in a kind of situation where there seem to be so many more conflicts. This is one conflict. It started, yes, with Hamas attacking Israel, then Israel's response in Gaza, as awful as it's been, and yet now we still, the instability seems to be spreading is really the concern.
Yeah, indeed. So I think the concern is, it's very easy to be sanguine about it, be dismissive, instead of say, well, we've seen this before, it comes and goes. But there's always that chance, that risk that indeed, this could explode and then be something that, if you look at Russia having invaded Ukraine, it's 2-3 years now, and then we tend to forget about these things, but the damage that it does, is immeasurable. So there's always that risk, therefore, that yes, this can come and go, but it may actually be something that can flare up and become very uncontrollably very quickly.
It would seem almost that there's not much space for our markets to move, and we see the gold price and Sasol in particular being hugely affected by this.
Yeah, so Sasol responds, almost one-on-one with the oil price. But I think if you look at the oil price away from the geopolitics now, fundamentally, there is no pressure for oil prices to rise, right? Simply because there's just massive supply, and OPEC has got so much capacity to fill in the void. So indeed, if the geopolitics, goes on for a while, yes, you should see a sustained rise in the oil price, but I think you should also expect, an immediate response from a supply point of view. So Sasol playing ebbs and flows on the back of that, and after yesterday's spike, today's kind of given it all back and down about 7%.
Patrick Matidi, thanks very much indeed, head of multi-asset strategies at Alawani Capital Partners. Well, obviously this situation is probably going to dominate into the next couple of weeks. The problem is always, and Israel is the one that started this, they say that Iran has a nuclear weapons program, Iran says it doesn't. But you can see that on both sides, no quarter is being given, and there's a lot going on in public. We're never going to surrender, never going to stop, etc. The real question, I suppose, is what's going on behind the scenes, and that we probably won't know for quite some time. You're with The Money Show, 6:30.
Travel is more than just ticking off countries. It's about the people, the culture, the food, the moments. I'm Pippa Hudson, and on Wonder the World, I invite you to join me every week as we explore destinations both near and far, with the help of fellow adventurers who share their unique travel stories. Listen to my podcast wherever you get them.
The Money Show.
With Stephen Grootes, live on 92.7 and 106 FM. Streaming on the Prime Media Plus app.
And DSTV channel 856.
Quite a lot of activity at the Constitutional Court today. It was the 30th anniversary of its formation. Lots of big words by people talking about how important it is. We all know that. The President was there, the Chief Justice was there, previous Chief Justices were there. Former presidents were there too, actually. One of them, Thabo Mbeki, was. I bet you know who wasn't. But just a sort of moment to reflect on how important the rule of law is for business. And this is something I've made this point before, that when we're commemorating the 30th anniversary of the formation of the Constitutional Court, it is worth just remembering how well the legal system can work, how long it can take, and how for most people, and certainly many, many enterprises in this country, people running small businesses, there's almost no rule of law to speak of. I mean, look at the extortion rackets in the Eastern Cape or the Western Cape or in many, many places. Look at the construction mafia. So important to commemorate, important to have an event like we did at the Constitutional Court, but actual enforcement of the law surely needs to follow. Otherwise, the economy is never going to grow.
The Money Show.
The Friday File.
The Friday File.
Well, over the last few years, it seems to me there's been a sort of almost a small explosion in the number of documentaries that people are putting out. In some ways, it's easier to do than ever before. In some ways, you've got a much more crowded market. There's no shortage of issues to tackle if you consider what's going on around us at the moment. One of the joys, I suppose, of a documentary is you're watching something, but your mind is being changed one way or another while you're watching it. The Encounters International South African, or the South African International, the Encounters South African International Documentary Festival starts this weekend. It's underway in Cape Town and Joburg. Its director is Mandisa Zita. Mandisa, good evening. In an era of sitting at home and streaming entertainment, streaming documentaries too, how different is it to have a documentary festival in cinemas?
Thank you so much. Good evening, and thanks for interviewing us to talk documentaries. And I think you've kind of touched on it when you said that when you're watching a documentary, your mind is shifting, you engaged on another level. And I think that's truly what documentary does. And if you're watching a documentary at a festival, it's a little bit different in terms of we curate creative documentaries. So documentaries that are more of an art form and a genre. And these documentaries, the festival creates a platform for us to commune around the documentaries, the issues they raise, and to have conversations about that and to be around like-minded people. So I think that's the difference.
I was going to say, it's watching it with other people, right? You're going to meet people who are interested in what you're interested in, and if you're very lucky, someone who completely disagrees with you about something.
Absolutely. That's why we have the debates and the discussions after the screenings, and we invite the filmmakers from all around the world, from the African continent, from Europe, to come and talk about the documentaries and why they've done that, the way the themes are handled, but also other people from civil society, politicians, to kind of unpack, because really there's so much information right now. We live in an age of instant information, right? Everywhere. So I feel like we cannot even decipher the truth or mistruths and distortions. And we live in an age of digital information, and there's so much digital misinformation as well. So, and now there's AI as well. So the truth is getting more and more distorted. Even on the news, you have to be careful which news channel you're watching, what biases they have. It's really difficult to get access to the truth.
Sure. I mean, I'm interested in the sort of, this is like the long form, right? I mean, you can go onto TikTok or YouTube Shorts or something, and you could probably get some of the information that's in these documentaries. But there is something about the long form. Reading a book is much more satisfying than looking at social media, and much better for you, even if it's a bad book. So what I'm trying to get to is there something that you get from spending, let's call it 80 to 90 minutes watching a documentary that you don't really get from anything else?
Absolutely. It is like reading a book. Sometimes the book can be very slow, and then at the end it rewards you, it gives you that gut punch. So sometimes documentaries can be like that, and it is an art form. So you're engaged oftentimes through characters, through intimate settings, as opposed to news coverage that engages you more globally in terms of the issues. But documentaries will be a little bit more intimate, and then the visual language and the visual poetry is what really draws you in, and sound, cinematography, how things are framed, all that creates the art form, the craft of the genre. And so documentaries, I think, have a more deeper, meaningful way of touching you than you would get in the news. And you just become more invested in whatever is being depicted on the screen.
You have quite a long list of documentaries. As I say, so much going on. How difficult is it to decide what you're going to show and what you're not going to show?
It's very difficult. We debate a lot, and sometimes we fight about it because we actually only have about 40 feature-length films, and the rest are short films. So we try and hit the big issues of the world because we don't have a major theme. We don't have like a global theme where we're like, oh, we're just going to curate around maybe democracy. We know that a lot is going on in the world. The world is so complex, and we want to reflect what is going on. So right now we have documentaries on a wide range of topics, but we also want documentaries from all around the world, and we want documentaries from the African continent, from different segments of the continent, from West Africa, East Africa, North Africa. So we reflect that, and we reflect the issues of the world. We reflect the conversations of the world, like AI, like Ukraine, like SpaceX, climate change. So all that is reflected in our program, and we prefer that because we want to keep our finger on the pulse and to reflect really the zeitgeist of the world.
You do also have to have a balance. You have to have things that are happening in South Africa, things that are happening around Southern Africa, our continent, and then the rest of the world. I mean, Gaza's a big issue at the moment. Obviously, I mean, how do you do that? You don't kind of want to neglect anything, but there's so much to choose from.
There's absolutely too much to choose from, and sometimes some documentaries are just beautiful to watch. They don't really have to be about anything really. If you can have that luxury of documentaries like that. But we have a smaller audience, for example, than other European festivals, where they get hundreds and thousands of people attending. And we know that we have to cater to a wide, diverse range of audiences in South Africa, from economic status to age groups. So we try and hit all the points in terms of there has to be some about art, some about personal profiles. There's definitely politics. The politics of the moment are always a favorite with South African audiences. And, I mean, we've been doing it for almost 3 decades, so we kind of understand our audiences well, and we know how to curate for them very well.
I think if I had to say to some people I know, let's go and watch a documentary on a Saturday night, I think they'll be, yeah, Steve, enjoy that. We'll see you next weekend. Because I think there's this perception that there's this great English phrase, worthy. You know what I mean? When it's worthy, it's serious, and you're doing it because it's the right thing to do, not because it's fun. But documentaries aren't always like that, right? I mean, you can come out of them feeling quite good.
Absolutely, and the art form as well is quite engaging. For example, tonight they're showing this documentary about a very serious issue. It's about the Ukraine war. But what the director has done is they took the sound archive, intercepted telephone calls of the Russian soldiers to their families and their loved ones. And that was intercepted by the Ukrainian intelligence. And just using that sound archive, they juxtaposed it with moving images of the aftermath of the war. And so you're watching this terrible, terrible landscape of the aftermath of the war while listening to the Russian soldiers speak lovingly to their girlfriends, to their families, but also depicting the horrors of the war and the carelessness with which they speak about the brutalities of the war. And that's where you get the gut punch. And it's not entertainment as we're used to it, but it just leaves you shocked and engaged and somehow just enthralled by what you're seeing on the screen.
I made the point a little earlier that it's easier to film and make something than it's ever been. That doesn't mean that you should just do it on your phone. Quality matters. Are you finding that there are as many documentaries to choose from? Are people still making the kind of long-form, important sort of narrative kind of documentary that actually is worth showing? Are you still finding there's a lot of supply, in other words?
There's a lot of supply. We get like over 550 entries, and it could be more. We just shortened the call, the submission period, but we used to get thousands, so there's actually too much. But the industry is in crisis. The industry is struggling with funding issue. Distribution models and channels have been dismantled. So the industry is grappling with a lot of challenges right now. But somehow there's still documentaries being made, and in some regions they're able to have cinematic releases and be globally distributed. It's a bit hard for African documentaries, and we as a South African film industry still have a long way to go in terms of reaching a point where we have proper distribution models and channels for our documentaries. But there's still a lot on offer. There's still a lot of choice for us.
How do you get people to come? New people I'm talking about. I mean, in the old days, it was a little easier, strangely. You just put on a documentary that you knew would get banned, okay? And that would make a big fuss. I mean, I shouldn't laugh, because often it was a very serious issue. But is it quite difficult to convince people to come? I mean, there'll be some people who I know will come. But to try and, I suppose what I'm trying to get to is to get new audiences is really the test, isn't it?
I think it is difficult to get new audiences in the country, but we do a lot of grassroots work in audience development. So we have community screenings happening in the townships with younger people. But generally, documentaries as a genre has grown in popularity. You can see, as you've mentioned earlier, the streaming platforms are showing more and more documentaries. Obviously, it's a certain type of documentary, but that has interested people. People that never watch documentaries can now say, oh, I watched this documentary about a sporting hero or a crime. Crime is very popular, true crime. But in a way that has interested people in documentary, and we're hoping that younger people are more interested, because we find that, there is a segment of young people that like the conversations, that like to be intellectually challenged. But I think we need to have more year-round screenings, year-round programs where we're actively engaging people around documentary, to have more independent venues, independent cinemas like the Bioscope and the Labia, the Labia Theatre in Gardens in Cape Town, that actually give a space for those type of films and create more of a community around that.
Well, thank you very much indeed. Mandisa Zita is director of the Encounters South African International Documentary Festival, currently underway. I'm sure you'll be able to find out more information about them, but that's underway at the moment. And documentary still, it would seem, very, very popular in certain markets, but also a way, really, I think, to change what you understand about the world.
702. Stephen is on The Money Show.
6 to 8 p.m.
Time for the Friday Biz Blitz on The Money Show. 011 8830702 021 446 0567. Those are the numbers that you dial. And it's time for the first question on the Friday Biz Blitz. Here we go. You know how it works. I got to give you the question. If you get it right, we move on to the next question. If you get it wrong, we move on to the next caller. Okay, first question. Here you go. In what year was the last South African Formula One Grand Prix? When was the last time we had a Formula One Grand Prix in South Africa? You were probably alive at the time. I actually sort of have a vague memory of the day. I wasn't there. But what year was the last time we hosted a Formula One Grand Prix? 011 8830702 021 446 0567.
Travel isn't just about destinations. It's about the people you meet, the cultures you immerse yourself in, the stories you carry home. I'm Relebogile Mabocha, and on my travel feature, I take you on a journey beyond the guidebook. Each week, I connect with fellow travelers, insiders, and storytellers to bring you the heart of every place. Whether it's a hidden gem right here in South Africa or a dream destination abroad. Join me as we travel through conversations, memories, and inspiration. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.
The Money Show with Stephen Grootes is brought to you by Absa Corporate and Investment Banking, proud sponsor of the Africa Energy Forum 2025.
Stephen Grootes
Taking your calls
on 011-883-0702.
Which year was the last time South Africa hosted a Formula One Grand Prix? 011-883-0702, 021-446-0567. And that is your first question on the Friday Biz Blitz. Let's go to Tswani Kamogelo, excuse me. Hi, do you know the answer?
Yes, it was in 1993 at Kyalami.
It was in 1993, Kamogelo. Okay, let's go to the next one, right? Which South African player was player of the match, man of the match, player of the match, for his century in the ICC World Test Championship final against Australia at Lord's last weekend? Who was the player of the match? Obviously a South African.
Kagiso Rabada.
It wasn't Kagiso Rabada. Maybe it should have been, but it wasn't. Sorry, Kamogelo. Let's try Rehana in Parkview. Rehana, do you know who was man of the match last weekend?
It was December Bavuma.
It wasn't, I'm afraid. I'm going to give you one last guess, though. Aren't too many left. All right, Rehana, I'm going to have to let you go. Mandla in Rosebank, Mandla High. Who was the player of the match last weekend? Mandla? Mandla? It seems to be silence from Mandla. All right. 011-883-0702, 021-446-0567. Which South African player was player of the match in the ICC World Test Championship final against Australia at Lord's? Something you should remember, particularly with the victory tour that's been going on over the week. But who was the man of the match? And, of course, really was an epic victory for us over the weekend. Let's go to, I think we can go to Riaz in Pretoria. Riaz, hi. Who was the man of the match last weekend?
Aiden Makram.
It was Aiden Makram, Riaz. You're right. Okay. In May, our consumer price index remained unchanged. So inflation, CPI, remained unchanged compared to April. What was it? So what was it in April and in May? What was inflation? Well, Riaz has just dropped the line. That's unfortunate. I think we have time for one last answer on this. What was inflation in April and in May? Lesotho in Pretoria. I'm joking. Obviously, he would know. Well, I suppose I'm just going to have to give you the answer, I'm afraid. It was 2.8% in May and in April. You're with The Money Show. It's just gone 7 o'clock.